hang on. There you go. The camera's all jerky though. Can I get it working? Yeah, I remember.
Nothing compares.
One of the biggest problems, what's making life so unaffordable for everyone, is the price of property. Hey guys, it's Scott here. I've got a very important. You will have seen Josh, and you'll have heard him if you're tuned into the Daily Renegade podcast. You will know him.
Diane, I had trouble going live. I had to reboot the laptop 2 or 3 times actually.
And you will know his unique research, his fantastic research that goes along with the Bible and sort of corroborates everything that we believe and everything that we hold dear, but also adds in the sources such as what was found in 1947 in Qumran. And he's a writer, he's a filmmaker, he's an author of books such as Unraveling the Multiverse.
Hey, Bart, good to see you, mate.
The Lost Prophecies of Qumran, co-author of Abaddon Rising. And I think that's as much as we're going to go with it. So what I'm doing, I think there's a little bit of a feedback that I'm not sure if that's you or me. I can hear myself, but it'll be fine because I'll mute myself when I'm talking or when you're talking. So guys, what I'm going to say tonight, as you're coming on, if you've got questions, put question first before the question. So write question, preferably all in caps, and then write what your question is for Josh, who's graced us with his presence tonight, and I'm really thankful for it. And we are going to talk specifically about a certain group of people called the Essenes. So I'm going to let Josh kind of explain who they are, why it's important to know about these people, and I'm going to let Josh sort of take over here.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for having me on, and thank all the live audience for joining us. So yeah, the Essenes to me is one of the most fascinating topics that a Christian can study. And it has to do with a group of Jewish believers. And this started about a couple of hundred years before Christ, like in what's called the 400 silent years. As it turns out, though, and this is between the Old and New Testament. So, you know, you read the Old Testament, everything seems to make sense. Israel is a certain way. And then you skip over to the New Testament, and when Matthew opens, everything's different in Israel. There's Romans now, there's Pharisees and Sadducees, and everything is totally different. Well, what happened? There's about 400 years of history in between the Old and the New Testament. It's called the silent years because traditionally there hasn't been a lot of information on that time period. We have a lot more now, things that fill in the blanks, such as what's in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, the Dead Sea Scrolls are important because these are the documents that the Zadok priests in Qumran, who were Essenes, they were the scribes and the keepers of these documents. The Dead Sea Scrolls contain every book of the Bible except Esther, and we don't know exactly why that is. It could be that there were copies of Esther, and they just have degraded so much that we don't have them now. But they have every other book of the Old Testament, not the New Testament, because that came later. They have every book of the Old Testament, plus some extra biblical books, such as Enoch, Jubilees, and many, many others. And these are interesting because they provide history and context. Now, one of the most important things about the Dead Sea Scrolls is that we don't elevate them to scripture status unless it already is scripture that we find in our Bibles. And I have a whole introduction in my book, Lost Prophecies of Qumran, that goes into why that is. So a lot of people will ask me, should the book of Enoch be in the Bible? And my answer is no, not because it's wrong or faulty or anything like that, but because God in his infinite wisdom decided to not have it in the Bible. Now, some could point to like the Ethiopic Bible that does contain the book of Enoch. And so there are debates that can be had there. my personal opinion is it's always best to just play it safe with this kind of stuff. You don't need the book of Enoch to understand the Bible enough to be a Christian. You don't need the book of Enoch to understand the path towards salvation and what Jesus did for you. Now that doesn't mean that it's not important. I'm not convinced that it's.
Hey, Shawnee, good to see you.
But again, that doesn't mean that it's not true. You know, my manual for my toaster oven is true, and I'm glad that I have it if my toaster oven breaks down. But that's not scripture. So that's kind of how I see the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's a lot of good history in there that I do believe is accurate.
So you had to move house again, have you?
Accurate, just not scriptural or not inspired by God. But again, it doesn't mean it's not true. So in those silent years, there is some ambiguity on the exact history and the exact players. But what seems like what likely happened, and again, I get into all this in the book. But when Israel was still pretty united, and you didn't have all these factions, well, they were invaded by Antiochus or Epiphanes, and a lot of people know that story from the Maccabees and stuff like that. He desecrated the temple, and what it seems like what happened was at that time, he said, "Okay, Jewish leadership, I will allow you to do some of your."
Guys, that the way he's jerking on the screen, it's because it's not loading quick enough. It's lagging. Like I had trouble going live today. I had to reboot 2 or 3. No, not 2 or 3. I had to reboot 3 times, and the camera's lagging a little bit.
Jewish things that you want to do, but you have to adopt our calendar. And there was a split in the Jewish leadership at that time because some said, okay, fine, we'll adopt the new calendar, or we'll adopt this pagan lunar calendar. And then another faction who became the Zadok priests, who became the Essenes, said, no, we're not doing that. We're gonna go off to Qumran and do our, keep doing it the way God said. To the Jewish people, the original solar calendar that we find in the Dead Sea Scrolls was so important because God specifically mentions on certain days you have to do these certain things in the temple. And if you're off by even a day, you could be killed for that. I mean, and that happened throughout the Bible. I mean, if there's one requirement that God has in place for a temple sacrifice or something like that, and they don't do it exactly right, they could be killed. And so the Zadok priests took that very, very seriously. They took copies of all their texts, took them to Qumran, and they left the main faction. And then those that were left behind eventually became the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So it seems like that was the cause of all of this split, why we have Essenes, Pharisees, and Sadducees. Now, in the New Testament, you're not going to find the word Essene, because that word came later through Josephus, I believe, and that term. And it basically means healer. They were known for having 100% accuracy in their prophecy. They were known for their being able to use all natural medications and stuff to heal. So they were called healers. And that's just what Essene means. But you do see references to them in the New Testament if you know where to look. So there are, well, before I get there, let me talk a little bit about how important prophecy was to the Essenes. So the Essenes, and this is funny because we kind of see parallels to this today. The Essenes believed that prophecy never ceased, that the Holy Spirit would still talk to people and give prophets prophecy. The Pharisees taught that prophecy was done away with, and that there really wasn't any new prophecies, no new revelations from God or anything like that. And the Sadducees basically didn't believe in anything. I mean, they had a couple of things, but they didn't believe in angels or an afterlife. And so to the Sadducees, they just kind of went along with whatever the government told them to do. The Essenes actually had a term for them. The Essenes would call the Sadducees the seekers of smooth things, and it was meant as like a derogatory insult, because they just want things easy, go along with whatever the government says. There's no afterlife anyway, so why even worry about it? Try to find as much pleasure as you can in this life, and don't worry about the next, because there isn't one. The Pharisees did believe in an afterlife, but their view of it was more closer to what modern day Judaism, which actually sprang from Pharisaical Judaism, believes in. And so there's like some ambiguity there. But the Essenes very much held on to the original calendar and the original interpretation of the Bible. So the Pharisees had what's called the oral Torah, which was, until they wrote it down hundreds of years later, they had an oral tradition that they said came from Moses, and it interpreted everything about the Old Testament for them. But even Jesus called the Pharisees out on this. This is just traditions of men, and it wasn't right. The Essenes absolutely rejected oral Torah, and they had everything in writing. They had, obviously the Old Testament, but they had a lot of their commentary in the rest of the Dead Sea Scrolls that helped explain things. And what's interesting is when you read through the Dead Sea Scrolls, I haven't found anything that contradicts with what we believe in as Christians, and their prophecies are amazing.
I wonder when the Dead Sea Scrolls were hidden. I wonder what year they were hidden in.
Only did they have a regular solar, yearly calendar. They had a couple different prophetic calendars that go hand in hand together. There's one. There's a couple different ones in the Book of Enoch, but they don't contradict. They're just. It's like a different way of telling the same story. So you get like two prophetic types of calendars, and then their normal solar calendar that they used year by year. So they were the keepers of all that. This is why when you read in the Gospels, there are times, like the Essenes were so good at prophecy. They actually did have a prophecy. And I believe it was called the Melchizedek document or something. But they had the exact date when the Messiah would be crucified. And of course, it doesn't use the word crucify. It says that he'll be cut off. But it has on their calendar the exact date, which to us would correlate to 32 AD. And it's absolutely phenomenal. So this is why, because they had that prophecy, and they also had other things about the Messiah that they were looking for. For example, in the Bible, when John in prison, John was likely in a scene. When John was in prison, he asks, are you the Messiah? Will you ask Jesus, is he the Messiah, or do we wait for another? The reason that's worded like that is because the Pharisees believed that there would be like one Messiah, and then he would die, or a war would happen, or something, and then later on another Messiah would come. But that these were two different Messiahs, basically. The Essenes taught it was the same Messiah, but he would come the first time to die for our sins. Essentially, they didn't have all of the information, but they got the gist of it. And then he would come back. He would be resurrected and come back later after an age, which that correlates to their calendar. We can get into that later. But so when Jesus answered, but that's why John phrased it that way. When Jesus answers, Jesus said, well, tell John that I've done all these things. And all of them except one you can find in the Bible. There's one about raising the dead. And Jesus says specifically to tell John that he rose the dead, along with like 5 other things. Again, all those other 5 things you can find in the Bible, but you cannot find a messianic prophecy about the first coming of Jesus that he's.
That's interesting. Oxygen comes up off the floor of the ocean. Wow.
Can find that in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so when John heard that, he was immediately convinced that he knew, because that's not a Pharisee teaching, that's an Essene teaching, which John was. But he's in prison, he's got a moment of doubt. Who among us haven't had that? So that's amazing to me. So that shows me that Jesus at least took the Dead Sea Scroll, the extra biblical Dead Sea Scroll, seriously enough to use that as proof text for who he was, who he is, the Messiah. So this is also why, because their prophecies were so accurate, sometimes in the Bible, God will talk to a group of people and they immediately get it. I mean, Jesus barely even has to say anything, and they're worshiping him, and they believe in him as Messiah, and it takes very little convincing. But then other times, when he'll talk to certain groups of people, no matter what he says or does, they won't believe. I mean, they even say that he's like possessed by Satan to try to get around the miracles and stuff. Well, that's because Pharisees, everything Jesus was doing, the Pharisees didn't expect, because they had oral Torah that was telling them totally different things. The Essenes did expect all of this because they held on to the original teachings and the original commentaries that they had from forever past, from their fathers and grandfathers and forefathers and stuff. So that to me is so exciting that you can see that in the Bible. And why some people believed it immediately because they already had all of these prophecies and knew what to look for. So there's kind of this myth that, and I know I'm running on and on, but I get excited about this stuff. There's this myth that no Jewish person at all when Jesus came knew what to expect. Like he took everybody by surprise. No one knew what to expect. That's not exactly true. The Essenes knew what to expect, and that's why they believed so quickly and so easily. Now, what's really exciting about the Essenes is after Jesus was resurrected and ascended to heaven, and after around the time they knew that the temple was going to be burned down because of their prophecies and stuff. They knew that was going to happen. Paul likely converted to the Essene way of thinking because he was a Pharisee. When it talks about in the book of Acts, there's a sect that people call the Way. That's the Essenes. The Way is the Essenes. Okay. Yeah. So and I go into great detail in my book about that. But what's so exciting about that is that we as Christians today come from the Essenes. Yeah. We are essentially Essenes converted to Christianity because the only thing that the Essenes didn't have yet was the Messiah. Once the Messiah came, they converted, and the Essenes didn't have it perfectly either. There were a couple of times where when Jesus is with, I believe it was who is it, John, the other John and James, and they went to, oh man, I'm blanking now. I don't have my notes in front of me, but they went to Samaria, I believe. And they're like, should we just rain like fire and brimstone and destroy this place because they're so wicked? And Jesus is like, no, you guys got to learn about love and stuff. Yeah. Well, when you read through the Dead Sea Scrolls, they do kind of have that sort of attitude. Like they are so vehemently against anything that's pagan. I mean, for good reason. I mean, they're so they didn't go and like slaughter people or anything over it, but because they still held on to the commandments and stuff. There were other factions of Jewish people at that time that were doing that, but the Essenes weren't. But they were so against it that they were against anything like that if you even broke an oath, they held oaths very seriously. You could get kicked out of the order just for that. So that's why they had that. So it's not like the Essenes were perfect. They still had some learning to do too, but they weren't opposed to the learning. Like they were open to the teaching. They were teachable, whereas the other factions weren't. And so they did convert from Essenism or whatever we would want to call it to Christianity. But the connection point between the two, I mean, it's like this short. Like it's so easy to get from Essene to Christianity. And there's nothing that contradicts. They needed to learn a little bit more about love, but that was about it. And so it's just so fascinating that we actually come from this amazing group of people known as the Essenes, which not a lot of Christians have had the fortune of being able to learn about.
Even like you say, in terms of the modern church today, I'd heard Dr. Ken Johnson say before that one of the things that they had when someone was coming in, they would basically assign roles based on giftings. So if you've got a prophetic gifting, you're over here. If you've got this type of gifting, is that true? Is that?
Yeah, they did that, and so they had like the School of the Prophets that was still going on. I mean, the last that we hear about it, I believe in the Bible until way later. But it was around like I think Elijah or something. But they still maintained the Book of the Prophets or the School of the Prophet. Excuse me. So yeah, they would spend some time with somebody. It was a 3-year long, basically kind of like a probationary or introductory or apprenticeship kind of place where if somebody wanted to join them in Qumran, they could do that, but they needed to get to know that person first to make sure they were trustworthy. Second, to know what kind of giftings they have, if they're going to be with the prophets or the healers or the teachers or the scribes or whatever. And they also just kind of had to pay their dues. They had to learn the Essene way. Now it's really interesting. Another name for Qumran at that time was actually Damascus. And now we have Damascus, Syria, but there was also Damascus, Qumran. I believe, and I lay out why in my book, but I believe when Paul went to Damascus, and I mean he's on a road called the Way and stuff on Damascus. I believe that was Qumran. I don't think that was in Syria.
I didn't know that was in that the road he got the light from Jesus was called the way. I never knew that. I do know he was on Straight Street when he got the Damascus. He was on Straight Street.
For several reasons why, but he also, Paul gives us this 3-year-long period that he spends traveling and doing all these things. Well, that just so happens to be the exact amount of time that it takes for somebody to truly convert to being in a scene at that time, because they had to go through all that, and especially with him being a Pharisee and killing Christians before, so he had to take that time to do that. But Paul lays it out right in the book of Acts when he talks about the way and that sect that or that group of people that people call a sect. He's talking about the Essenes there, and that's who he ended up joining up with. So we definitely have both Johns. James was probably an Essene. Paul converted. Peter either was or converted later. That I'm not as sure about. And there's just a lot of really interesting stuff like that. It's like when you know what to look for, you really do see Essenes all over the New Testament and Essene teaching all over the New Testament. You just don't get that word because that word came later.
It's between you and Derek Gilbert when we're talking. There's something thrown at me that just rocks everything that I've read before. I'd never known that that would have been a different Damascus that could have been a different Damascus that Paul was on. But it explains so much, and I think that when we, I'm a student. My degree was in modern history, but whenever you forget your history, it kind of leaves an unambiguous stance for most people. That they don't actually know where they came from. They don't know the background of it. They don't know where they're going. And even like you touched on, the change of the calendar, and the change of the calendar from a lunar calendar or from a solar calendar to a lunar calendar. And when that happened, I know it says in Daniel 7:25 that talking about the Antichrist or the lawless one, or that he will attempt to change seasons. Do you think the Essenes identified maybe Daniel 7:25 as to what the rest of the Torah believing world were doing at that point?
Yeah, probably. And they even had another prophecy in, I believe it was Jubilees, where now a lot of modern scholarship says today that most of the Dead Sea Scrolls like Jubilees and Enoch were written a couple of hundred years before Christ. We don't actually know that. I mean, we know the documents themselves are that old, but we don't know if those are copies. And yeah. I mean, that could have been, the Book of Enoch could be really old. It does have some more modern references to the time. Mm. Jubilees is another one where they held that to such esteem. That was like their favorite book was Jubilees. They found more copies of Jubilees than any other copy, even the canonical biblical books. Okay. They found more of Jubilees. Well, there was a prophecy in Jubilees that said where God is telling the Jewish people there will come a day where, way in the future, where you're going to abandon this calendar that I've given you, and you're going to be cursed for it. Like it's like a really bad thing to do. Yeah. And so that prophecy is in Jubilee, and that did end up happening. So yeah, I would totally. I figured that they knew what to expect. They knew that was going to happen, and when that deal was offered to the Jewish leadership, I believe they knew that was a fulfillment of the prophecy in Jubilees, probably Daniel as well, and they decided, we can't have any part in this. We don't want part of the curse, and they left. And it's also interesting too because even the Pharisees admitted it was around that time that all of the miracles and everything stopped working. So it's really, but that led them to believe that just prophecy died out. Like God just doesn't do prophecy anymore. When really it's like, no, you messed up your calendar. You made a deal you shouldn't have made, and now you're under some kind of judgment for it.
So the current Hebrew calendar, I think, has a 5784. Mm-hmm. As it's, but then we know that the Essene calendar, I think it's around March, April time this year, will change to 5949.
Yes.
Can you maybe speak into what that means?
Yeah, definitely. So when the Essenes had their calendar, so the Pharisees, and you can go back in history and actually look how the Pharisee to the modern Jewish calendar, how all of that worked out. All of that's documented pretty well. The Essenes, they start their calendar basically at like the year zero, like the day of creation. Well, technically, they started on a Wednesday because to them that's the fourth day where the sun and the moon are created. So that's where they start their calendar on that Wednesday. But they start their week on Sunday or Saturday or on Sunday, excuse me. So they start their calendar on the very first day of creation and just count upwards. You know, our calendar is a little weird. We start ours around the time that people at the time thought that Jesus that Jesus was born, and it's it's a little bit off, but it's pretty close. So that's like our year zero. Theirs was the beginning of the world. So we have BC and AD. They had what's called AM or Anno Monday or Year of the World. So according to the Essene calendar, and I can break that down and talk about how the calendar works, but according to the Essene calendar, if we're understanding everything correctly, we should be in the year 5949, which will be the last year before the final jubilee of our age. And so to get into all that, I can talk, if you want, I can talk about how the calendar works and what ages actually are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. So the same way that we have years, decades, centuries, millennia, they had similar things, but they were broken down a little differently. So the Essenes had years, excuse me. They had years, they had Shemitas, which were 7-year periods. They had Jubilees, which were 50-year periods. Then they had Onas, which are 500-year periods. And then they had ages, which are 2,000-year periods. Now the age is really, it's really interesting because all throughout prophecy, especially, it talks about the age and the end of the age. And I always thought growing up, I've been obsessed with prophecy since I was a little kid. I just love it. And up until a few years ago, whenever it talked about age, I just thought that meant kind of just a period of time. Who knows exactly how long it is? It's just a long period of time generally. But actually, it is a specific time frame that they had in their calendar. So their entire calendar for all of creation, the Essenes say that there would be 7,000 years of creation and the way that it is now, from the first day till from the first day of creation till the last day of the millennial reign and the new heavens and new earth. So, and they split that time period up into all those different things, jubilees and onas and stuff like that, and ages. Well, they said that those 7,000 years modeled the week. So, and then they would group. So every day is like 1,000 years, which actually in Peter, that's what he's talking about. That's an Essene teaching, and a lot of people don't know that, but and I didn't for a while either. But in Peter, when he says, a day with the Lord is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like a day, he's specifically talking about the calendar. And there's ancient church fathers that are like within the first few decades of the church that mirror the same thing and really explain it, like in the epistle of Barnabas and things like that, where they actually explain that yes, this is what this means. 1,000 years is like a day on the Essene. It's like it models a week. So 7,000 years of creation before the new heavens and new earth. So they split those up into ages, and there's 3 main ages, and then the last one is a Sabbath like half age. So there's 7 altogether. So and each age is 2,000 years. So the first age was it's called the age of creation or the age of chaos, sometimes it's referred to. And that goes from creation to the call of Abraham. Then there's and then there's so that's 2,000 years. Then there's the Torah age, which is from the call of Abraham up until it's right around the destruction of the temple, but it's technically 75 AD, because in 75 AD was when the final nail in the
Johnny, I never knew that.
I never knew that. Was put in place, where a decision was made that they no longer needed and on the Pharisee side, that they no longer needed the temple to do things, to do these rituals. They just needed to pray a lot and be good, to be counted worthy in God's eyes, which is obviously wrong. They missed the point, but that decision occurred in 75 AD. And then the Age of Grace, which is actually called that in the Dead Sea Scrolls, called the Age of Grace, that, according to the Essenes, began in 75 AD, and then will go on until 2075 AD. Now, a couple of things about that, because we would say, well, the church age started way earlier than that. You know, we would probably put the church age as starting probably at the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. That's usually what most Christians.
Yeah.
And that is true. That is true. But what happens with these ages, and I think God does this on purpose. Like, I don't think this was by accident. So while, yes, you can technically put an exact date on the end of an age, you can't really say, well, that's when such and such and such is going to happen. Because sometimes, and a lot of times, it happens before. So it usually happens in that last Jubilee, so that last 50 years. So think about it like this. The Torah age is winding down, and the Age of Grace, the church age, is about to start. And in that last 50 years, you get this kind of transition period where they're almost blended together, because you get all of these prophecies about the first coming of Jesus, and that came really early in the final Jubilee of the Torah age. That came really early in that final Jubilee. Everything that Jesus did, I mean, was basically, in his first few years of his ministry, and it was right very early in that Jubilee. So he would have likely, died, resurrected, Holy Spirit came down in probably 32 AD. And I'm not super dogmatic on the exact year, but that's as far as we can figure, that seems to be right. 32 AD. So you would say, well, the church age started then, and you would be right. And the Essenes wouldn't argue with that either. But at the same time, you also have the Torah age finishing. So there's almost like this blending effect. And I give a couple examples in the book to help understand this. The first one is, it's like if you're running a relay race, the race with the batons.
Yeah.
There's a time when the first runner goes around and hands off the baton. There's a time where both runners are running together holding the baton. And there's a specific area marked off for that. Well, the ages are like the same thing. So there is a specific end date to an age, but a lot of times that will start earlier. And another example I give is, like, if I'm throwing a birthday party at 3 p.m. on Friday and I invite everybody, well, what that means is by 3 p.m. on Friday, everything should be in place. That doesn't mean that I start preparing for it then. Maybe Tuesday I'm figuring out what decorations I want for the house. Wednesday I might be setting them up. Thursday I might be hiring performers or attractions, whatever. Friday at noon I might go pick up the cake. But by Friday at 3, everything should be in place so that when people start showing up, everything's there and ready for them. Mm-hmm. So that preparation happens earlier. So there is a prep time for the next age that starts early. Now, what's really exciting about our time is, if the Essenes are right, if the calendar is right. And we have the same thing too in from the first age to the second age, because right at the end of the first age, you have the whole Tower of Babel incident. Yeah. But the age doesn't, the next age of Torah, it doesn't exactly start with the fall of the Tower of Babel, just like the church age didn't start with the fall of the temple. The first age, or the second age, started with the call of Abraham, and the age of Torah ended, and the church age started in 75 AD when that final decision was made. It seems to correlate with that time. So while we have 2075 as the end of our age according to the Essene calendar, I don't want anyone to get discouraged about that, because what's exciting is, especially with the way the world's going today, there's always an apostasy at the end of each age. And if we're not in an apostasy, I don't know what apostasy looks like. I mean, the world has gotten so evil and weird. Technology that's never existed before, we take for granted because we live in it, and we use the internet every day, and it's easy to just think of this as normal life. But humans, as far as we know, have never lived like this. I mean, this is weird. I mean, we went from like horse and carriages, we've had that for like thousands of years, and then in a really short period of time, we go from that to like, now we got like rockets that go into outer space and stuff. It's insane how much this is ramping up.
But even what you're saying about the way the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Essenes, the three groups, were, you're kind of seeing that now. You're seeing the Sadducees, the ones that go along with whatever the states say, and that's the only way to go. And then you've got the Pharisaical sort of look, as in, let's just deny the prophecy is still in action. This is kind of like my daily sort of Facebook back and forth with people.
Diane, China's been getting hit with a lot of floods as well.
And then you've got those who are holding to prophecy. It all seems to be culminating, as in Ecclesiastes 3, there's nothing new under the sun. Sorry for interrupting, Carrie.
No, that's I'm glad you did, because that's a really good point, because they were dealing with the same types of arguments and things that we're dealing with today. I mean, there's a big debate. Does prophecy still happen? Does God still speak to people? They dealt with that too. Even within the Essene name, just like, you can have people calling themselves Christians that aren't really all that Christian. They just apply that name to themselves. Well, there were Essenes doing that too. And they would fight about things like the same kind of things that we fight about today. There was a faction of Essenes that basically said everything was idolatry. Everything. You can't even carry a coin because a coin has a picture of Caesar's face or whatever. You can't even carry that. It's a sin. It's idolatry. And today we have that. Like, don't put a Christmas tree up. That's idolatry. And everything is idolatry. It's the same exact arguments. It's the same exact contention in the last part of our age that they dealt with in the last part of their age. And I would assume those were probably the same ones at the end of the first age. We don't have a lot of documentation on that, but we do for sure at the end of the age of Torah. We're dealing with the same kind of infighting, under the umbrella of Christianity. We're fighting about the same exact stuff. There's several examples I give in the book of that. But yeah, that's another one of those proofs that this apostasy is real. It is happening, and it's only getting worse. But the good thing is, during those times, it's like, during the end of an age, stuff gets dark. Stuff gets really, really bad. I mean, you had people in Israel that were like the circumcision party. They would kill you over the circumcision issue. So it was really bad. We're seeing a lot of repeats of that today. So in that last 50 years of the age of Torah, while all these things were getting dark, you also had Jesus come on the scene, and he had his entire ministry. Which, if he died 32 AD, then his ministry probably started around 29 AD, somewhere around there, maybe a little earlier, because it's about 3.5 years, depending on the month and everything. But so you have that happening really early, and then you have a lot of time that things happen. Well, in our final Jubilee, and this is why I said I don't want people to get discouraged by the 2075 thing. I also don't put a date on the rapture or the beginning of the tribulation. I do like lay out examples of ways that it could work out. I don't know where you or your audience stand on it. And this is nothing that I fight about, and I would never fight over a Christian over this. Personally, I'm a pre-trib rapture believer. Don't know if you guys are or not, but either way, it's totally fine.
Yes, I am.
Cool. Yeah. Awesome. Well, all right, great. Well, we're in the same company.
We're not.
Yeah, and I always try to make that distinction, because it's something that I want to talk about, but I don't ever want to, I don't fight about it, and I don't listen to anybody that fights about it. I think once somebody starts fighting about it, they're engaging a little bit in that end times apostasy, and we shouldn't be doing that. So in the pre-trib interpretation, you could have a rapture at any time now. I mean, everything's been fulfilled for a rapture to be able to happen. Could happen 2 seconds from now, could happen, who knows. But we need to remember is that it's not the rapture that starts the tribulation. It's the confirmation of the covenant with many.
Yes.
You could have a large gap of time in between the rapture and the confirmation of the covenant. You could have decades in there, really. And I wrote about that in the book. Think about how deceptive that would be for people, because most people that aren't really Christians, and they just kind of generally know what a rapture is, they think that starts the 7-year tribulation. So let's say a rapture happened today, and the rest of the people that are left behind on Earth, they're probably a lot of them are going to be really scared, because nothing like that has happened before. Some people might go the alien route. I actually think initially a lot of people probably would figure, okay, that's the rapture. It's got to be. What else could it be? You know, my grandma's been telling me about that for years. I never took it seriously, and now her and all of her church friends are gone. But imagine now, 7 years goes by after the rapture, no Antichrist, no cosmic signs, like none of the prophecies are. Maybe that was just some weird dimensional shift, or maybe that was aliens, or maybe it was something else, and now imagine 10, 20, even 30 years goes by. Now you got a whole generation of people who were born after the rapture and don't have the same respect for it. Just like I was born after World War II. I respect it, but I didn't live through it the way that I lived through like 9/11. I don't have the experiential not knowledge of it in the same way. Well, you would have a new generation of people growing up after the rapture that wouldn't have that either. And if there are any Christians left at that time, they'd probably make fun of them and say, "No, that was like 30 years ago. You're still holding on to that." And I think that's why it's so hard. It could be why it's so hard for people in the book of Revelation to repent. They see all these signs, such denial over it. Why is that? If the rapture had just happened. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is you could have an early rapture. Again, that could happen today. And you could literally have the next day, the beginning of the tribulation. And let's say that goes on for 7 years until, I don't know, 2032 AD. Let's make it exactly 2,000 years. Why not? Well, let's say Jesus comes and destroys the Antichrist. Well, what now? Well, everything needs to be prepared to start the millennium in 2075, if the Essene calendar is correct, meaning we need a temple in a city that's described at the end of Ezekiel. And I mean, it's this big, beautiful thing. Imagine how long that's going to take to build and to clean up the entire world. How long does it take to teach the surviving world what the new rules are? What the law of the temple is now that Ezekiel talks about. Because right now we're in the law of Christ. In the age of Torah, they were under the law of Torah. And at the end of Ezekiel, it tells us that during the millennium, it's going to be the law of the temple. And it lays out a lot of what that's going to look like. Well, all of that's going to need to be communicated to the world somehow. That city and that temple is going to have to be built. And the fourth temple, I don't know if that's a complete rebuilding or if it's just a cleansing of the third temple and it's embellished upon. I don't know, but either way, it's going to take a while for people to build that, because these are human beings going on into the kingdom age that will likely be doing that. I mean, you and I will already have our rewards and everything, and we're the bride of Christ, so I don't think we're going to have a part in that, but they're going to need a temple for their own temple rituals during that time. So that could take, 10, 20 years, who knows how long. But there will come a time where, another part of that too, also, with the rapture thing, the Essenes believed that time worked the same in heaven as it does on earth, and that's why having the exact days was so important, because angels perform temple duties as well. Now, they're not sacrificing animals up there or anything, but if you read like the beginning of Revelation 8, you see the angelic counterpart of the one of the rituals that they do on earth in the earthly temple, with the censer and the smoke and all that. And so they parallel. Well, if that's true, and I believe that's true now, that time works exactly the same in heaven as it does on earth. If that's true, how long does it take for Jesus to give everybody their reward once we get raptured? Does it happen all at once? Or to me, it seems like it happens one at a time. Because when Paul describes it, he says basically, a man will stand and all of his works are wood, hay, and stubble, and then all the stuff he did for Jesus basically is this is a paraphrase I like to call him, because I don't have this stuff exactly memorized word for word. But there's precious gems and jewels and stuff, and then the fire comes down, burns up all of the wood, hay, and stubble, and only leaves like the good stuff, and then that's the stuff that we use to worship God and present to Him. So how long does it, we don't know enough about that entire process. Like when we individually, it seems like it's one by one. It doesn't seem like it's that this happens to all of us all at once. I could be wrong on that, but
even from what you said about the way the rapture could be perceived, as in my mind's just reeling over that, in the sense that there could, if there is a big gap, then that means probably the greatest sign in modern age that the Bible is true will be used as a catalyst for the beast system, but also as a reason to not believe because of the delay. And that actually fits.
Okay, I don't think time's the same in heaven as it is on earth, like Josh just said. I don't think it's the same at all.
Sin.
If it was, and there's like 50 billion people, let's say 2 billion of them get into heaven, that whole period of mankind, how long would it take to give 2 billion people their rewards? It's not the same as time on earth. I think he's wrong here. And he's wrong about pre-trib as well.
I know we're sort of postulating here, but it kind of fits in as to why so many people fall, because you would think if everybody saw that, oh my goodness, my granny, my granddad, that Christian friend, they've all gone. I better read the Bible. But then, time seems to be the biggest thing, and the more people have to wait up and develop the gift of patience, then the more they're likely to believe a deception. And it just, sorry to interrupt, I'm just, it's thoughts going through my head as you're speaking here, because the 2025 to 2075 Jubilee, which obviously isn't that long before that sort of commences. And even when you're looking at this through the past Jubilees and the past ages, like you said, there's that sort of meshing together, that baton exchange. Well, in the end of the Torah age, start of the church age or the grace age, there was obviously all of the miraculous signs that we read throughout the Gospels are at the very start. And then 70 AD, 75 AD, that's the sort of end of that, but that's the fall of the temple. That sort of fits in with because I would look at prophecy, like the Moedim version of prophecy, that prophecy tends to be pattern.
Yes.
What was before will happen again, nothing new under the sun. And that would fit in. Not that I'm looking to fit things in and fit things in around my theology or anything like that, but it kind of resonates with me that there will be some sort of delay. But it's likely that we will see an awful lot of prophetic activity, whether it's the rapture or not, the prophetic activity at the start of the Jubilee. And I'm going to be quiet again. Don't worry.
You're fine. Yeah.
Are you taking me over?
I've heard you talk on Enoch's prophecy that again coincides with this. So I'm going to just be silent again and let you bring all that together.
So this is really cool. So in the book of Enoch, and it's not like it is a separate calendar, but it correlates. Like it's again a different way of telling the exact same thing. So and this is more of a prophecy than it is exactly a calendar, but it works as that as well. So it's called the Apocalypse of Weeks, which that just sounds awesome, or Enoch's 10-week prophecy. And basically what he does is he splits up all of the 7,000 years into 10 weeks, where each day is 100 years. And he has things to say about all of them, about all of these time periods. And so far, they've all come true. Now, what's interesting is somebody could say up until around 200 BC or so, somebody could say, well, they're just recording history and whoever wrote it is just acting like it's prophecy.
Yeah,
they could say that, and it is really close. But once you get after, what is it, week 5 or week 6? Once you get after that point, you can't say that anymore, because by that time, one of them is about, like, listen to this. This is week 6. It says, and after that, in the 6th week, all who live in it shall be blinded. That's the apostasy of the Pharisees, Sadducees, all that stuff. And the hearts of all of them shall godlessly forsake wisdom, and in it a man shall ascend. That's Jesus. And
Diane, Mum come home from Bali 3 days before that collapse, that data collapse. So we're lucky we got her home just in time.
At its close, the house of dominion, the temple, shall be burnt with fire, and the whole race of the chosen root, that's the Jewish people, shall be dispersed. Wow. They absolutely had the book of Enoch before this came to pass. Like no historian even disputes that. They had the book of Enoch for a couple hundred years before this came to pass, and look how specific that is. And then I dedicate a whole chapter in the book to this whole prophecy because it's amazing. When you get into the other weeks, I mean, you find the Protestant Reformation in there. You find like church history predicted. Now, what's really interesting is the 9th week, because that's the one that we're in. Now, another part of this prophecy, it's what's called chiastically structured, which just means it's kind of like a mirror of itself. So 5 and 6 have something to do with each other. 4 and 7 have something to do with each other, so on and so forth.
Palindrome.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yep, just like a palindrome, but it's in theme rather than words.
Okay.
So in the 1st and the 10th weeks, it tells you what happens in the 7th part of that week. Then in the 2nd and the 9th, it doesn't give you a time frame at all. And then all the rest of them in the middle, it says in the midst of that week, it says at the close of that week. It tells you something that's going to happen at the close. Well, in the 2nd week, it points to something having to do with Noah, and Noah was born right in the middle of that week. The middle of that week would have been 10:50 a.m., and Noah was born 10:56 a.m. So right within 6 years of the middle of that week. In week 9, we get the same structure. We don't have anything that says at the close of the week or the 7th part or anything like that. And so it stands to reason, maybe like the 2nd week, because that would be the palindrome mirror of it. Yeah. Maybe we're supposed to be looking at the middle of that week. And guess what year is the middle of the 9th week? It's 2025.
Yeah.
And so that's mind blowing. I'm going to read. Let me find it, and then I'm going to read the 9th week because and keep in mind these are 700-year periods. So according to Enoch, we're already almost 350 years into the 9th week of his prophecy. So week 9 says, and after that, in the 9th week, the righteous judgment shall be revealed to the whole world, and all the works of the godless shall vanish from all the earth, and the world shall be written down for destruction, and all mankind shall look to the path of uprightness. And so we already know what that is. That's the return of Jesus. Yeah. All evil is expelled, all that. And after that, all mankind that survives that will be looking to the path of uprightness. So there's something there that, since it's structured so similar to the 2nd week, leads us to wonder, I wonder if the beginning of that is going to be somewhere around 2025 or somewhere around that time. Because again, even the Noah's birth thing, that was 1056, so it's not exactly in the middle, it's a couple of years off, but still, that's pretty close. So yeah. I think this kind of stuff tells us that time is growing short. And then in the 10th week, it talks about if I can actually read it if I can find it. And after this, in the 10th week, in the 7th part, there shall be the great eternal judgment, in which he will execute vengeance amongst the angels. And the first heaven shall depart and pass away, and a new heaven shall appear, and all the powers of the heavens shall give sevenfold light. That's so cool, because that ties in with Revelation, with Isaiah. And then the very last part, which, let me find it. If you had something to say. Here we go. Okay, sorry. Okay, here's the last part. And now we have in all of this, and in the book, I put both the Dead Sea Scroll version and the Ethiopic version. The Ethiopic version, we technically did have that before the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. It's just at that time, nobody knew if the Ethiopic version could be trusted. Well, now that we have the Dead Sea Scrolls and can compare them, the Ethiopic version of Enoch is fine. It is like pretty close. There's nothing I haven't found a contradiction in there that's so bad that would, it would change the meaning of the entire verse or anything. Mm-hmm. But so since the Dead Sea Scrolls is fractured, we can use the Ethiopic to fill in the blanks. So after the 10 weeks, after this whole prophecy, the Dead Sea Scroll version that we have says, and after that will be many weeks, the number of which will not have an end ever, in which goodness and justice will be achieved, which is beautiful. But then the Ethiopic version says, and after that there will be many weeks without number forever, and all shall be in goodness and righteousness, and sin shall no more be mentioned
Sean, he will say prayers for little Vinny as well. God bless him.
forever. And now I tell you, my sons, to show you the paths of righteousness and the paths of violence. Yea, I will show them to you again, that ye may know what will come to pass. And now hearken unto me, my sons, and walk in the paths of righteousness, and walk not in the paths of violence. For all who walk in the paths of unrighteousness shall perish forever. I just love that. So that's obviously talking about the new heavens and the new earth, and what that's
Okay, Shorty, good night.
And I believe that that's at that point where, Paul says, prophecy and this will pass away, but love never will. That's going to be that time. We won't need prophecy anymore because everything will be done. But, of course, we'll still have the history. We'll still have the remembrance of everything that happened. And my gosh, I don't know about you, but I cannot wait for that time.
I think this is like, somebody just put up, this is so interesting. It really is. And I want to just quickly, if it's okay with you, just bring in something. I know that you were good friends with Dr. Tom Horn. And I know that he recently passed. And I also, I've read his books, and I think was it The Messenger?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was talking about Apophis, and it gave a possible date. Now, I'd spoken to Mondo Gonzalez about this, and he had said, yes, but, there is another flyby of Apophis a few years later, I think maybe 10 years later or whatever, but the current one that we're sort of going into or going forward to is, I think, 13th of April, 2029.
Yep.
And Tom Horn had it was sort of propositioned, well, 3.5 years. If that was Wormwood of Revelation 8, then 3.5 years takes us to 2025. It seems to me that 2025 is going to be interesting regardless. I don't know what why do you think it is that, like, I know a lot of pastors, and I know that there's the inerrancy and the God-breathed word of God, which is what we have in front of us. And I know there's other books that, such as the Book of Enoch, that are mentioned in the Bible,
yep.
But there's hesitancy by a lot of people to even just sort of look at them from the historical weight that they carry. Mm-hmm. Do you think people are missing certain alarm bells, warning signs sounding off, that
not people like us,
because they just won't look at this?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, in the sense that I do believe these prophecies are accurate and it can teach us a lot about our day to day. But also, while prophecy should have some importance to every Christian, not every Christian is going to see it as important. It's like how Paul said, not everybody's an eye, not everybody's an ear. There are going to be things like prophecies are really important to me, but to somebody else it might be evangelism. So if somebody whose their passion is evangelism and they're going on the street and preaching the word of God, which I don't do that, I should, but I just don't. If prophecy is more my thing. But if they're not reading the Book of Enoch because they don't know and they're just trying to be careful and they don't know if God would want them to do that. They're just trying to be cautious.
Yeah.
I don't think God's going to judge them for that. I don't think that would be one of those where you don't even know the time of your visitation. I don't think it would be like that. Now, somebody who is just absolutely opposed to even looking at it and is like super dogmatic and mean and nasty about it and kind of a Pharisee about it, then I could see that, being dangerous territory to be in. And so I wouldn't say that Christians have to read the Book of Enoch or any of these extra biblical books. I would say you can gain a lot more context with it. And if it fits in with what God is directing your life, directing where your life should go, you have to listen to God. So, pray about it. See what God, because I grew up in a household that absolutely rejected, I grew up in a church that rejected all of this stuff, like Enoch, Jubilees. I think I still have people in my family that if they knew that I was even talking about this, they would assume I'm not even a Christian. That's how seriously they took that. So it took me a while to kind of understand that. Look, as long as you're not thinking of it as scripture, and that's why I start the book out with that.
Yeah.
Is you can't really look at it as scripture. Look at it first as just history. Just these are documents that existed. These were documents that were written by Jewish people, and just read it just in that context at first. And then start exploring, if prophecy is of interest to you, start exploring the prophecies and test them against the Bible, test them against history itself. Because I've said in the book, I have not found a contradiction between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Bible, like as of yet. I haven't found one. But if I did, then at least in that part, at least for whatever text that is, I would have to throw that out and go with the Bible every single time.
Yeah.
Amen.
So
Yeah.
I love the Dead Sea Scrolls. I do not believe that they should be added to our Bibles, and I don't believe that a Christian can like gain an extra spiritual boost. But you can definitely gain understanding, context. Through that, you could develop a closer relationship with God, but not everybody's going to work like that. So I say in the book too, I fully expect that there are Christians out there who know nothing about the Dead Sea Scrolls and could potentially be better Christians than some of those who are experts in it. It's not the Dead Sea Scrolls don't determine your place with God. That's your relationship with Jesus that determines that. Like, what's your relationship with Jesus?
Yeah.
But there is an element where if somebody, you could be missing out on some things if you don't want to at least give it a chance. So I would encourage people to, cautiously, always in prayer, always constantly be in prayer about it, and just maintain the knowledge and the understanding that this is not scripture. That doesn't mean that it's not true, doesn't mean that it's full of lies or that it's corrupted. Scripture is just something different. And that's what we need to put our ultimate, that's where we need to root ultimately our understanding in is the Bible.
I think from my experience, like we do go out in the street, we do preach, we do witness to people on the street.
That's great.
And
we need more people like that. I don't have the fortitude to do it. I wish I did.
Well, one of the things that we've noticed.
Well, metamorph, no one's forcing you to be here. You can always go.
Is that, and I was saying this on Sunday in church, that on any outreach that we do, the people that we're witnessing to, unbelievers, they will always come up with the same question: is this the end times? Even if they do not confess a belief in Jesus, confess a belief in the Bible, they are sensing something about the age in which we live in. And I think that I get the extra biblical books, not everybody's going to delve into them, but I also think that sometimes the people that are so pharisaical in their approach to them are also the people that won't speak about the book of Revelation.
Yep.
They're also the people that won't talk about the time and the season that we're living in. And I find I don't want to separate the two, because I actually realized this during COVID. And I remember when COVID first started, and I was talking to a guy and said he didn't believe in Jesus, didn't believe in God, didn't believe in the Bible. And he said, I think it was about 2 minutes later, he said, but this is like something out of the book of Revelation. And I was like, well, yeah, so let me tell you about Jesus and why you need to know. I think the two of them have to connect in some way. If you know, the way I sort of say it is, if you know when you were a teenager, if your parents were out and perhaps you had messed up the house, or you'd had people around and you'd messed up the house, if you knew they were coming back and when they were coming back, and specifically that, oh my goodness, they could come back at any moment, that's when you start to tidy everything up and get ready. And I think there has to be a degree of that in the church where people are going, look, this is the season that we're living in. When you look at, I would listen to yourself, Dr. Ken Johnson, Derek Gilbert, and people like that, Mondo Gonzalez, and I would listen to a lot of what you're teaching, and then I would look at the other side and see what's actually happening in the world. So there's I don't know if you've seen 2025 Global Governance document that's come out.
Yep.
Or is it 5 and 50, or I can't remember the name of the website, but it's all about sort of pushing everything to that beast system that we see in Revelation 13 to Revelation 17, that beast system sort of platform and world view. And 2025 just keeps coming up. I can't, no matter what I do, I can't seem to get away from, and again, not a date setter, not in 2025 rapture or anything like that. but there's certainly an escalation happening. And that would be in line with what you teach with the Essenes. And then, you know, like you said, every end of an age starts with or ends with an apostasy of sorts.
Yep.
I don't know if there's anything you want else to sort of add to that, or if I can see if there's any questions here.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer as best as I can.
Okay, so Cara has written, you have your glasses on, Josh. I have lost my glasses, so I'm actually
Sure.
Big letters. Can you read what that says?
Let's see. Yes. Why did the Essenes stay away from others and live in the wilderness? Well, and I think that it really has to do with they felt the need to separate themselves from the other Jewish people at the time because they had fallen into apostasy, and the Essenes didn't want to be associated with that. But that's just the small group of Essenes that we would call the Zadok priests that went to Qumran. There were actually Essenes all over Israel. So the way that it worked, it was kind of like you got your priests there in Qumran, but then you have citizens of Israel that if they ascribed to what those priests were teaching, then they would call them an Essene. It's kind of like, not in theology, just more in structure. It's kind of like how you have the Vatican priests, but then you have Catholics all over the world.
Okay.
So not every Catholic is a priest, but every priest should be a Catholic. Now, I only use that just in terms of structure, not at